Hello, this short video will give you some feedback on your MA1 drafting that you did for the first two components for Major Assignment 1, and this general feedback should help everyone as they're working to improve their drafts. Quickly, before we talk about some ways you might improve your drafts, let's just go over the writing process so that you kind of understand how all of these pieces fit together. So, the invention part of the writing process is really where you're starting to learn about an idea and kind of generate and invent ideas before you do the brainstorming. And we did that by viewing lectures about genres, discussing those genres, doing readings of memoirs and graphic memoirs, listening to the podcast from The Moth, and also participating in RI1. That all prepared you for the first major component of Major Assignment 1 so that you could start brainstorming about what kind of story you might tell. And you did that by gathering in your mind your own individual stories. You didn't really have any sources for this assignment. You were just using your own brain as your source. I had you write it down in a very rough sketch of a story through a two-part process in Major Assignment 1, Component 1. And the first part of that process was answering the rhetorical situation questions and about audience, purpose, text, and mediums. And then the second part of that process was actually just writing down a sketch of a draft of a story you might tell later for your graphic part, for the revision into the graphic part. So you should have turned in the explanation, the detailed explanations of your audience, purpose, context in the first part of Major Assignment 1, C1, and then you should have also turned in a few paragraphs telling the story of your memoir. And it could have been rough. That was fine. It was just giving me an indication of what sort of story you're going to be telling. So that kind of helped you organize your thoughts. So really in Major Assignment 1, Component 1, you brainstormed and gathered and organized. For Major Assignment 1, Component 2, I asked you to completely revise all of this information you've gotten in the first four parts of the writing process into a new genre, the genre of the graphic narrative. And we looked at the text for samples of graphic narratives, and we talked about either hand drawing or using Toondoo, a comic generator, to create your graphic narrative. And so what you're going to want to do after you listen to this feedback video, if you haven't already started to do so, is finish up adding to that graphic narrative, polish it up, get it ready for the final draft, and submit that as the last component of Major Assignment 1. So the reason that we are looking at taking something that you wrote in paragraph form and turning it into a graphic is because I want to make clear to you that when we talk about revising in the writing process, we're actually talking about re-seeing your project as a whole and being comfortable with making new choices, making new changes, adding things, scrapping things, and really digging in and participating in the process. And I think often when we tell students to bring in drafts, what some students do is think that that means they have to have a completed project so that they can come in and edit for sentence level errors. And the thing is that when we're actually really participating in the writing process and getting our best work possible, what we're doing is actively re-seeing our project as a whole and not being afraid to slash things, add things, and move things around. So I wanted you to take that written part and turn it into a whole new thing. So it forced you to absolutely have to re-see your draft. So I don't need another copy or an edited copy of the written draft because that it's no longer important. What's important is the final copy of your graphic draft. You have two options for creating the graphic, which many of you did correctly. I'll talk first about the comic generator option, and then I'll talk a little bit about the hand-drawn option that a few people did select. For those that selected the comic generator, for the most part, they looked really good. I do have some tips for how you might improve them a little bit more, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But however, there were a few of you that inserted some images around the paragraph forms of the text, and that's not really quite what you need to be doing. You actually need to recreate the text into a graphic comic, okay? And remember, comics don't just have to be funny. The graphic example in our book is serious in nature. It's the details that tell the story through image, with text being part of it, part of that hybrid text. So it's not just simply inserting photos into an essay. This isn't a photo essay. This is actually completely reseeing your essay into a graphic genre, okay? However, if you have real photos, Toondoo, if you're using Toondoo, it does allow you to insert photos into part of the images. For instance, I suggested to a student that was talking about a particular music video that he could take a still image of that music video and put it in the TV in the living room in one of his panels in his graphic narrative. So you can insert real images, but again, your focus should be on reseeing your text into the image format. And it should be a hybrid text, meaning it should have text and image, but it should be in the format and the genre of the medium and the genre of the graphic narrative. A few brave souls decided to do the hand drawing, and I have to say the hand drawings, for the most part that I saw, I was super impressed with. You guys had a lot of really excellent artistic talent with some real details in the hand drawing, which I was so proud of. One thing that you hand drawers might do is rely on dialogue or even little text boxes underneath the hand drawing, kind of like you see in the Fun Home example in the McGraw-Hill Reader, to kind of indicate the movement from scene to scene. But for the most part, I was super impressed with the hand-drawn tiles. So one question that keeps coming up on the discussion board, in the email box, and in the online office hours is length. Professor B, how long does it have to be? How many do you want? What exactly do you want? Well, it really just is, it's going to depend. I don't know how long your story is, and everyone's story is so incredibly different and so personal. So I don't know, I can't tell you how many tiles it's going to be. As a student, you should trust your instinct to know what's acceptable and unacceptable at this point by the time you get to the second level of composition in your college career. Obviously, if you turn in 2 slides without a lot of detail, it's not really going to fully tell a story. So I'm betting that most people will have at least nine different little boxes of graphic to tell a story. I don't see how else you would have a beginning, middle, and end in the story unless you did. But it's not limited to 9, and unless you could draw something or create something incredibly detailed and nuanced that didn't need 9 based on your story. So there isn't really a you didn't meet this many tiles so you fail. Instead, the length is dependent upon your interpretation of the instructions and trust your instincts. I'm trusting that as you have been a student for many years in your life, you should know what's appropriate and inappropriate in terms of effort by now. If you're concerned about the length of your assignment and you're having trouble kind of getting length, details will really help you. Think about how you can add more detail to the background. You know, if you're describing your childhood bedroom, what was on your walls, what was on, what did the bed look like? You know, add in your stuffed animals. I don't know what you had in your childhood bedroom, but put the details will make the graphic stand out. And also, if you're not focused on your background at the moment and you're focused on the character, you can kind of, leaving some things out sometimes makes the character stand out a little bit more. Be consistent with your characters. Pick a person that represents who you are and don't change them into a whole different person. I saw someone had themselves represented as 8 different characters they picked randomly from Toondo, and as the reader it was hard for me to tell that that was still their same person. So pick a character and manipulate that character and be consistent with it. And you can also label your characters when necessary. Like you can put a little label under the first time you are introduced, like if it's you and your sister, and you could put me, sister, and little labels just so your reader knows who these people are that you're illustrating. You don't have to label them every time, because if you're consistent with the characters, the reader will remember, oh yeah, this guy with the funny hat is you, and they'll remember that. But it does kind of help in the first tile or two if you label your characters. So those details are going to help with your length. Also, let your background tell your story too. That's the part of learning the genre of a graphic, is that it is about the dialogue, and the dialogue helps. But it's also the images in the picture that help move the story along as well. Do not forget your audience. Remember, I have seen your drafts. I've seen your process, but your audience, if you look at the assignment directions, they have not seen your draft. You're just trying to appeal to an audience of community college students as your audience. So they don't know your story of the first time you when you got your first puppy. They haven't read your written memoir that you did in the invention and brainstorming stage, and they're not going to read it. They're just going to see the graphic as the final product. So make sure that you're considering your audience and you're putting all those details in. You should be creating that final draft as if someone is going to read it and they've never seen or heard anything about you or seen any of your drafts. That final draft should have all the details in it for your audience. My final piece of advice is do not forget the last part of the revision process, the polish part. Before you turn in your final draft this week, make sure that you proofread. Proofread the dialogue, proofread the images. Make sure that they're consistent. Things are in the right place. The characters are consistent. Go through and look back over everything and make sure that that final polished draft is what you want your audience to see as your final product for your best possible grade. I hope you'll find this short video helpful, and of course if you have any further questions you can always post on the questions, concerns, and comments forum in our D2L course shell. And if you have any personal questions you can always email me at buzzarda@midlandstech.edu. Don't forget to put in your section and your student ID number so that I can find you really quickly and get back to you via email a lot more swiftly. Good luck as you create the final draft of your graphic narrative, and I've been super impressed with the drafts, and I'm so looking forward to seeing what wonderful things you guys come up with in the final post.